a Congress might say no about something, even if it gives them most of what they want. They weren't happy at going, to Congress to get military commissions. The Jack Goldsmith, who did a book on kind of the terror presidency, looking at the legal issues and the question of torture and stuff, a very interesting book. He was one who, though he has an expansive view of the president's power, thought they should go to Congress to cement it, that in his view, the best way you can kind of solve this is you go and you have Congress behind you. But, he was kind of waved away by David Addington and, the others in the administration who didn't want to share any power at all.
And now, what's up with James Baker III and Warren Christopher coming out and talking about restraining the powers of the president? I know Baker's made himself clear on TV that he wants talks and not war with Iran, that kind of thing. And yet, when I read about their proposal, it seemed like the rewrite of the War Powers Act that they're proposing is extremely modest. It basically says the same thing as the War Powers Act, only the time frames are a little bit shorter, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I think that there's a certain desperation there. I mean, my reaction when I wrote about it was, if presidents won't obey Congress under the War Powers Resolution, why do we actually think they're going to, obey Congress under this new, that's like the War Powers Consultation Act? So I think there's a certain desperation there. They recognize a problem, and they don't know how to kind of bring the system back into balance. As presidents, will work hard not to be constrained, and Congresses don't like to do it. I think that they're hoping that if, to create this committee of the congressional leadership and committee chairman to be reported to, and I think they figure if you mandate explicitly, you've got to talk to these people, and also you mandate a vote, even though you can't actually make the administration listen to it, but you mandate it, that they hope that it'll kind of force the Congress into the decision-making process. I don't think it's going to do much good. I think you get the same problem as you had under the War Powers Resolution. Well thought out, but if nobody's going to enforce it, presidents will do what they want, and there'll be no impact.
It's funny. Remember that Republican debate where I guess it was Giuliani said, I don't care what the Constitution says, I'll kill whoever I want. And then Mitt Romney said, well, I'd have to consult my lawyers first. Or maybe it was Giuliani and McCain agreed they'll do whatever they want, whatever Congress says. And Romney said he'd have to consult the lawyers, and he got jumped on for having to consult the lawyers rather than just doing whatever he wanted. And Ron Paul was up there alone saying, yeah, but it says right there in the Constitution in plain English.
That's right. Now, unfortunately, these days, what the Constitution says obviously is not so important for a lot of these people. They figure they make points by claiming they'll do anything it takes, irrespective of the damage it does to America's fundamental institutions.
Yeah, well, I think that's just McCain's middle name right there, as far as that goes. And by the way, he is kind of a madman, isn't he, this John McCain guy?
Well, look, I jokingly call him the crazy warmonger. I think he's obviously not technically insane, but this is a guy who, has yet really to find a war he didn't want to get involved in. And that's kind of frightening. This is somebody, you don't joke about going to war with Iran and joke about killing them with tobacco strikes, unless, you have some pretty malevolent designs there. He's written about attacking North Korea. That could spark a real war on the Korean Peninsula, and he seems oblivious to that. He wanted a ground war against Serbia. If you talk about a war where we had no interest, which is utterly irrelevant to us, which was over Kosovo. This is a guy who wasn't even satisfied with bombing the Serbs. He wanted a ground war. And he wants confrontation with the Russians over, silly issues like the status of a place called Abkhazia, which frankly is just utterly irrelevant to America. So I think he's extraordinarily dangerous. I think this is somebody who doesn't seem to understand that trying to be a bully is not likely to, kind of make the world a better place. That he seems to think all we have to do is demand everybody do what we want. Well, frankly, that is more, that's going to make us a lot of enemies, and people will resist. They're going to have the same reaction that we would have if people were trying to bully us. So I'd say he's quite dangerous.
Yeah, it seems like, I'm reminded of George Bush made some stupid statement where he sort of had amended America's Taiwan policy in regards to China, just with an off-the-cuff statement, and everybody kind of slapped himself on the forehead and said, oh, you're not supposed to say it like that, George.
That's right.
This sort of seems like the same kind of thing where McCain, John Judas pointed out in his recent article in the New Republic that John McCain has said outright what we all know is the case, that the anti-missile missiles going into Poland and now into the Czech Republic, not just the radars, but the missiles too, he's gone ahead and said these are for the Russians, not the Iranians. At
least he's honest about it. I ask people if we really think the Russians are stupid. When we expand the former anti-Soviet alliance up to their borders and tell them it has nothing to do with them. I mean, really, they aren't stupid. I mean, whatever you think of them, they aren't. They are not stupid. We shouldn't treat them like they are.
Although that is one of those things where, everybody knows the truth, but it's the off-the-cuff statement. It's sort of the same thing with the Taiwan policy, right? Bush didn't say anything that everybody didn't already know.
That's right.
The diplomats had always had this fine line that they walk in order to not piss off the commie Chinese on the mainland.
That's right.
Yeah,
he was quite explicit in saying, essentially, we'd go to war, if they attack Taiwan, and instead the policy is supposed to be what they call strategic ambiguity, where you kind of hint at things, but you never quite say it.
Yeah, which, me, I'm all about taking any military, anything that we have in the Czech Republic, Poland, or anywhere else in Eastern Europe, or even Western Europe for that matter, and get them out. But it just seems like McCain's the kind of guy who will go ahead and this is what Judas says in that article too, is that he will make it personal. It's all about he doesn't like Putin or whatever, and that's the way he's going to decide American policy towards Russia.
Well, that's right. You think, here's a guy who is happy to have troops in Iraq forever, not realizing kind of what we're seeing right now is, actually, they don't, the Iraqis aren't interested in that. But, again, McCain is so oblivious. I guess he can't imagine a world in which kind of good people of good intentions elsewhere might not want us to dominate. And that, I'm afraid, he could easily get us into some wars that way, because if you really believe that everybody on Earth wants us to run everything, we're in for a very rough time.
Yeah, and I think that's really another problem that I have with him is I'm afraid that he really does believe the silly things that he says in his sound bites and his talking points. Like, for example, hey, we'll make it 10,000 years. Why not 100? Why not 1,000? Why not 10,000 years in Iraq? As long as we're friends with the local government there and our guys are just holed up on their bases, then of course, it ought to be just like Korea, just like Japan, just like Germany, just like Italy. We ought to occupy them forever. Why not? He really does believe that.
No, I think that's absolutely right. He likes to present himself as being this, foreign policy genius who doesn't need on-the-job training, but what he's demonstrated is he actually understands very little about the world. He thinks he knows a lot, and frankly, that's extraordinarily dangerous. Those kinds of people are the worst people to have in a position of power, especially the U.S. presidency.
Yeah, George Bush knows nothing, but John McCain is a know-nothing know-it-all. That's even worse.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, now, let me ask you about this, just because I know you've written about it and I know nothing about it, but I know that I should know all about it. So, the Law of the Sea Treaty. What is this thing? How close is it to being passed and ratified? Is the American Senate down for it? What does it even do, and why am I against it?
Well, it's an omnibus treaty. It's a monster kind of thing. And the problem with these things is, you've got good and bad that get mixed together. So it has a lot to do with freedom of the oceans, where basically it's taken primarily customary international law, basically the way we behaved over the long term anyway, freedom of navigation, put that in along with some environmental provisions. Some are good, but some are questionable. Along with a really awful international seabed authority, which is going to be run by an assembly and a council, and it'll be what they call the enterprise to mine the seabed on behalf of the world. I mean, it was created back in the 70s when kind of coming up with grandiose, international institutions that were supposed to have lots of money and hire lots of people was kind of the thing you did. And it was kind of a different world which no longer exists. And it really is, it's bad news in my view because it gets into issues like technology transfer. It raises questions about whether there would actually be controls that would result in terms of domestic environmental policies. There's issues of litigation and whatnot. So I look at it as being, there's fine stuff here like navigation. That should be done separately. It doesn't make sense to put this stuff all together and essentially package it with this relic that was created 20, 30 years ago. The Clinton administration did some renegotiation and made it less bad. I mean, when it was first created, the Soviets had 3 seats and the U.S. had no guaranteed seat on, in the council, for example. And this is a really nutty thing for America to have ever agreed to. So they fixed some stuff like that. The problem is we don't have a veto, and the way the system operates, the whole creation was the desire was to have lots of money from the seabed that could be handed out by kind of a third world dominated international seabed authority. So it's a really, in my view, very problematic structure. The U.S. has signed it. The Bush administration, ironically, wants it. It's sitting before the Senate. They're probably not going to take it up this year because it remains quite controversial. But I suspect there may very well be a vote next year. It could easily be pretty close. I mean, this is something which you've got oil companies who say, oh, let's go for it because there's some oil out there that we might be able to get. And you've got some environmentalists who are supporting it because they think it'll create more regulation. U.S. Navy likes it simply because anything that says freedom of navigation they think is a good thing, even if in practice, it wouldn't give them very much. I mean, realistically, China's not going to spend a lot of time reading the Law of the Sea Treaty in determining whether or not it challenges us in East Asia. That's going to be a matter of power politics, not the Law of the Sea Treaty. But, some people find it appealing, but I think in practice it could be rather dangerous.